Goodbye. Second to your dream. Oh, the federal Molly said, could have had him any day. Gonna let him slip away. Out of kindness, I suppose.
All right.
How you doing?
So lots of stuff going on. I was at Distributech last week. It was popping. It was exciting. A lot of talk about AI and the grid, and a lot of talk about data centers. A lot of talk about um, virtual power plants. There's this company called No Homes, and they're 16-month-old startup, had a huge booth. They claim to have 1 million customers connected to their system to do virtual power plants. They even claim to be in Texas in some places. So they basically leverage the infrastructure in the house, like your thermostat and what have you. And so it seems like that's coming back again and strong. Lots of interesting things about EV charging, and you probably read the news about BYD being able to charge a full battery in 5 minutes. Wonder what that does to the grid. So, anyways, Johnny, what's going on? Are you done with the Disruptor 50 and CNBC, and what else?
I'm almost done. I like to really read about them and look at all of their plans before I get there. But I've been doing a lot of stuff, and like you said, the grid has really become more center as the world is changing. I'm going back to my idea of the political economy. We dropped political out of the concept of economy in the academy. But I'm going back to my literature on political economy because it seems as that we have combined the economic, the political, to create the economy. And as we do that, and if you look at what's happening and how the world is trying to change in these changing times, and the grid becomes more centered. As a matter of fact, I think that all of the data centers should be on the ground. I think the grid would be the target if you had a terrorist attack. I think it would be, of course, the target if it went cyber. So I think that the grid has become very, very interesting as we move into this part of the century. And if you look at what we've done and what's happening in the world from a political economy, political sense, we have taken our wealthiest people in the world, uh, to compete with China as they buy up and create their own Silk Road. As we know what China is doing, and of course, it's all related to electricity. It's creating a Silk Road, and their government can do this overnight. We cannot do that in America. So I think what America is doing is using the wealthy, the billionaires, to go buy up BlackRock and et cetera, go buy up all the buildings around the Panama Canal and to compete with China on that. And at the very, very center of that, of course, is the electricity, and how you essentially get things done. So for the first time in probably, since World War II, how we manage things and how we power things have become at the center of everything. During World War II, for those of us who read about it, and I was born at the end of that, of course, is that we always went after, and as a Vietnam veteran, we always went after the power sources of the enemy. And I don't think China is an enemy, but certainly I think it's evolving as a competitor. And so you begin to ask not only questions about your local grid or your state grid, but what about satellites? What about the relationship between what we're doing now and satellites and electricity? How will all of this change the political economy, of the world? Because although economics tried to separate itself from politics, this president has brought the political and the economic right center. We always knew that money talks and BS walks, but never have I seen it so displayed as a combination in Washington, D.C. And I say that, of course, as a former appointee of President George W. Bush. What I mean by that, if you look at how plans were going at the inauguration, all the billionaires were there. We're going to need their money to compete on the international scene because China is a socialist sort of country, and they can do what they need to do, and the government can buy what they need to buy. So we're doing it on a wealthy point of view, which brings to me, as an old professor, the political economy. So, Andreas, I think that the grid and how we look at the grid is very important in the changing political economy of the world. And I think we've never looked at the grid, in that way. We looked at the grid as something that just managed our lives rather than being very, very strategic
Yeah.
for the defense of the country. As a matter of fact, I'm calling for and I want my distinguished colleague to write about this. I'm calling for a cabinet member that will be responsible for electricity and the movement of the protons through that. So we would have a cabinet member dedicated to just power, and that's electricity. Don't want it under Homeland Security. I don't want it under DOD. I want my distinguished colleague to say it. John Sibley Butler said the following: we should have a cabinet member dedicated to power. And I'm sure that Llewellyn King, no relation to Martin, of course, although they both have African roots, will write that and give that quotation to my credit source. Thank you, Llewellyn.
Well, I'll try to credit something to you, but it's increasingly difficult to find something.
Come closer. Come closer.
Come close. I didn't hear that, which was probably good.
Sorry, let me turn up the sound here.
Yeah.
Better shape.
Go ahead and talk.
Okay, let's see now. I seem to have lost this picture.
No, go ahead. We can see you. We can see you.
Okay. Well, the situation is very precarious. I made a very interesting interview yesterday with Markham Hislop, who runs energy in Canada, and he really exposed, for my appreciation, the vulnerability we have in the northern tier states to electricity supplies coming in from Canada, especially New England is tremendously vulnerable. And if the president persists with the tariffs that he's going to introduce any minute now, we may have a severe interruption in electric supply from Canada, which will shake the whole grid. So it's a very critical moment, and it would behoove us to take it very seriously. Otherwise, we're in uncharted territories in our relation with our old allies, in our relationship with Russia, and our relationship even with China. So it's a very disturbed picture. We need China for large electrical equipment. We still are not building the large electrical equipment, enough of it, in the United States. We have not seen the flood of companies coming back with anything like the energy that we anticipated. So it's a very difficult and precarious time, in my view.
Well, I concur with a lot of things that are being said, and I, find it interesting that I have never been so excited about being alive and what's going on with the grid and flying cars and AI and computers and just construction, 3D printing. I mean, you name it. It's just fascinating times.
That's fascinating, but politically, we're in very unstable times, and we don't know how it's going to shake out. And
I agree.
For once, the politics is dominating the technology. Normally, technology is more important in our evolution than politics. That is not so at this point in time.
Okay. Well, the key of all that, though, giving our guest, who I'll introduce in a moment, is that electrification is ramping while the world has decided to live off the plug of the grid. And so there are so many questions on the journey So we're lucky to have Dan Smith, who is the VP of Transmission at Lower Colorado River Authority, also known as LCRA for the locals. And he's going to be with us for a while. And Dan has both private sector and public sector experience, enterprise experience, working for big companies that consume energy, and then most recently with LCRA, and prior to that with Austin Energy, managing the grid. LCRA, and it's a both water and electric government agency that it has a big chunk, probably about a third of the geography of the state of Texas. So anyway, welcome, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Andres. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm looking forward to the discussion, already lively. Didn't know that we had an American Idol hopeful in John Butler. If he hadn't exceeded the age limit, he'd probably be competing right now. So that was nice. And then, yeah.
Wait a minute. Willie is 92, you know.
I know, but both of you are over the age that you can compete in American Idol. That's that's sad. Yeah, I think us older folks, we should be allowed to compete. It's a type of age discrimination that's not right, and also
I'm with that. I think we should see Johnny up there competing with young people, showing them how to do it. I'm with you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about LCRA, and we are wanting to dig in and follow up with a bunch of questions.
Sure. Yeah. So and interestingly, even since in the last few weeks, I have just transitioned, still at LCRA, but I'm now the vice president of research and innovation. So a great shift for I'm looking forward to that. But spent 5.5 years in transmission and loved leading the system operations team, and the great, as you stated, Andres, wonderful times that we're living in right now. Challenging all around, but also just huge transitional things occurring, and no doubt a very exciting time to be in this space. Prior to that, I ran the transmission distribution business unit at Austin Energy, the local power company here in Austin, and that's where Andres and I first met, in fact. And I was there for 17 years in that capacity. And then prior to that, I was a customer of Austin Energy's at AMD, semiconductor manufacturer. It's real interesting because we were considered a large load at the time, and we were peaking at about 35 megawatts. And I think everybody knows that that's easily about a tenth of what we're calling a large load today. So things are really, really different. And really, what John, you were communicating earlier is spot on. We're in some very interesting, precarious times, and some challenging times. And so that's a quick history, on my background.
So tell us a little more about Austin, about the LCRA. Give us some color about customers and maybe
Sure.
Capacity and all that.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, in fact, so we were established in 1934 by the first female governor of the state, Ma Ferguson, signed us into existence to manage the Lower Colorado River. By the way, the people on this call, most maybe know, but that river is not the same river that runs through Arizona and in Colorado. There is another Colorado River that starts and ends in Texas, and it's about 900 miles long. And we were established really to manage that Lower Colorado River due to flooding and droughts, and making sure there was adequate water supply. So we were created as really kind of an agency of the state. We're not really a state agency, but we don't take any tax revenue or anything like that. We actually self-support so that we do provide community benefit. But as we were established, we started to generate power off those dams that we finished building and built more, and then we started to transmit and distribute that power to rural Texans, and so that kind of formed our electric transmission distribution side of the business, and so we had a generation side of the business, transmission side of the business, of course, a water side, and then we created a system of parks. So we have about 40 parks that scatter through this lower Colorado River basin, and then we really have a fifth business unit that we stood up. So we were always providing communication systems, especially for a lot of these municipalities and co-ops that we serve. But we've now, with changes in this Texas legislature, we now have a broadband business and a private LTE network that we're setting up. So those are really kind of our 5 business units, if you want to look at it that way. Real clearly, and I don't actually know the exact year, but we divested of any distribution years ago. So we're a transmission only company. So our customers are roughly about 50 municipalities and cooperatives in the state of Texas. And depending on the day, we're second or third largest transmission company in the state. Encore's the behemoth, but between us and AEP, we're somewhere around that second or third largest transmission company.
Excellent, guys.
For us Austonians, we know that after the flood back in the 1920s, the reason why all of the businesses started on 6th Street was because the Colorado River always flooded the 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So we had to go all the way to 6th Street to put the enterprises on. I think I guess the question that I have, and of course I know your operation extremely well, whether or not you're doing great things or being in the paper, right, for being blamed. But I guess my question that I have for you, and especially as you rotate, if you will, to your new business, how has the technology changed that we're not using that can improve what you do? I mean we have been doing billions of dollars of research on the grid, and we know we have a separate grid in Texas, and we also know that our our energy is owned by the city, which is interesting within itself. So as you rotate to your new role, what would you like if you had a wish list? What's the first thing you would like? What would you put on that wish list?
Well, it's an interesting, John. I'll say something up front that's I would say not directly technological oriented, but I think it really kind of stems a little bit to how we have to kind of navigate some of the political landscape. But it is having true integrated resource and grid planning from the generation to the transmission to the distribution to the customer community, that holistic planning process. And largely right now, we have something that people call integrated resource planning, but it's really a bit limited. Now, I do think there is a connection to technology there, because that increases already a fairly significant and complex transmission model that planners have to work off of, which is very highly computational intensive. And we've overcome those demands where things used to take days to process a model and make sure it solved and worked. But now, as you start expanding, I think we are going to need to be able to take advantage of what AI can do and some of the large computational needs that are coming up. But that being stated, I do see a connection with it. But I think just organizationally and planning perspective, that allows us, I think, to have a very critical part in place to really know where are the right investments. And there aren't one single silver bullet. You can't just say, I'm going to solve this by bulk electric supply. And one thing Texas is blessed with is significant levels of wind generation out west, and solar, just eye-droppingly increasing in capacity. But we're not going to solve our entire resource needs by just adding more renewables to the grid. In fact, that's introducing problems and opportunities. And that's back to that would be my second one, is really creating, whether it's real inertia or synthetic inertia in the grid, that enables us to ensure we don't go to probably one of the most horrible days of our life, if not month of our life, would be if we ever blacked out the grid. And so I do think from a technical perspective, the onset of renewable generation, which Texas has significant penetrations of that, are also introducing a decrease in system inertia. There are opportunities to solve technically the physics of the grid elements, are something that we have to have our eyes on. And I think part of that is how we do some levels of synthetic inertia in the grid. So those would be two I'd maybe start off with.
Let me ask you this. Is there anything that happens behind the meter? The Internet of Things that because this fast idiot that they call AI, which is just a fast idiot, it's using all the stuff put out there. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be fabulous, right, for doing things. And it looks like to me, the biggest change that I have seen as one had been studying this for 10 years, is that what's happening behind the grid really also, from a customer's point of view, right, becomes very, very interesting as we talk about the integration of strategy and technology in the future. So my question, do you in your new role, do you strategize about what's happening behind the meter?
Yeah, we do. An interesting thing on that, unlike my old role when I was at Austin Energy, I had a much closer contact to that end user, whether they were a residential customer or whether or not they were a large industrial entity or a data center. Now we don't have that. We go through these communities, community power distribution service providers, and so that disconnect is an opportunity for us, and one that's not easy. But to answer your question, from a strategic perspective, we are keeping our pulse on all of that. We just have less direct capabilities. But to go back to my initial point, I think the reality is we really do need to recognize how much that customer and I even add the word communities play into that holistic solution, which is behind the meter type solutions that they allow us to better potentially shape the load. They have the ability to be an asset. And I think another kind of waving the wand, sort of a number 3 to my growing list is I do think solving for kind of the regulatory construct, because basically people are going to do the business model, and the market has to match or or incentivize the type of things we're going to want to see. People won't, in general, at least in large enough masses, just do it because it makes it's good for the environment, or it's good for the grid, or it's good for the state. It's going to have to mean something to them from a dollars and cents perspective. So the market construct and the business model elements are things that have to be worked on to incentivize and allow those things to occur, including potentially saying to a grid operator, we're giving you some control of what's behind the meter, so that you can utilize it in a way that shapes the load or reacts in a way that that enables us to curtail or whatever there can be a multitude of things that we would need to accomplish. But I think again the challenge there is there's Austin Energy, for example, they may set up something. They have the ability through their city council to come up with a rate structure or an incentive that works. But that's one dot in the state, one load pocket. How to handle this from a more holistic perspective is a challenge, and that's why I mentioned back to my integrated resource and grid planning. It has to go further than what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield to my distinguished colleague from the Northeast.
Well, I'm very interested, Dan, I've been associated in some small way with your organization going back to the days of S. David Freeman, who was your CEO for a while, a rather interesting and colorful person in the world of electricity and energy in general. I wanted to ask you about rotational inertia. Why do you have an inertia problem? Is it coming from your solar or your wind generation, where you don't have a naturally rotating shaft?
Yeah, so the penetrations on both of those resources together are effectively, none of it is, well, depending on the moment of the day, we'll either see, a typical load profile in the middle of the day would look like wind being low and solar being high. Together, they may constitute some things around, we'll say 30 to 35,000 megawatts out of, depending on the moment, a 60 to 70,000 megawatt grid. Things get even more precarious at night when loads drop, and it is almost solely wind at that point. But the wind blows strong and the load's lower. But we've seen times where the penetration of both solar and wind is at 70,000 megawatts, 70%, excuse me, 70% of the grid. So, we're seeing, I think there's no way to put it to state this way. There's just one, it almost depends on looking at the load profile of those generation profiles there. So that's where we're seeing it. And what's happened is we're certainly leveraging that resource, and the grid and the frequency still offering in the band is swinging to some level, but it stays within almost a band, and so it can get a little precarious. We've had Texas has kind of been known for something they've called the Odessa events, and there's been 3 specific issues where IBRs have dropped offline due to grid faults, some normal type of a grid operation, some type of a transmission fault that was cleared. However, these IBRs dropped off and resulted in a frequency dip. And those 3 plus a couple of other incidents have kind of constituted the need to really look at, one, the ride-through capabilities of IBRs and the inverters involved, but then also look at how system inertia be addressed. So I'll add one not new technology, but one that's kind of getting a new life. Is one that's getting new life in the grid is synchronous condensers. And so ERCOT seeing, deciding how to provide some level of a system inertia in the system, has located strategically out more in the West Texas portion of our grid an additional 6 to 8, I believe the number might be 8 additional synchronous condensers. We have a couple in the system today and another 8 or so coming online, but all of that is around this aspect of putting some
these are to provide substitute inertia to maintain the frequency, the 60 cycle frequency. the grid.
Yes. Yep.
It's a very interesting challenge because most people know very little about inertia and how vital it is in electricity generating. I would like to ask you to tell us how big is your system in total, and what is the distribution between solar, wind, and gas or water generation? You have dams. What is your system mix, Dan?
Yeah. So and so I'll speak to it. You know, if I'll start with the transmission system. So we own a little over 5,000 miles of transmission line currently at 345, 138, and 69 kV. We additionally operate and own over 400 substations, so that kind of constitutes the grid per se. LCRA does have a generation portfolio that's is a mixture of hydro, which admittedly is a small amount that comes off of the dams, and then we do also have we have natural gas, we have some coal as well. That's our generation mix, and we have a little over 4,000 megawatts of generation. We are bringing on an additional peaker plant at this point, and it's a natural gas peaker plant. What I'll state, I like what our general manager says. It generates enough power for 100,000 customers or one data center. So that kind of puts a little bit of light to this element of our the large load growth. What I will state, which I think I can maybe generally speak to is the grid at whole. So we interconnect transmission. We're agnostic in a sense. We interconnect everybody, but you know, everything we're interconnecting these days are renewables and battery, of which the vast majority of it's solar. But we have over 16,000 megawatts of resources that we're interconnected today to. We have about 80 to 100 interconnections in the queue. So there's a lot happening in this particular front. And we're seeing that mix as a whole. Like the vast majority of everything we're interconnected to and what we are connecting to the grid is renewables. And that exact mix, I think might have something that will help me resource off of memory. I'm not so good all the time. Let's see. Yeah, guys. So yeah, our basically 16% of what we're interconnected is wind, 14% is solar, 2% is hydro, 27% is gas, 10% is coal, and then 8% is battery. And I find that to be interesting because just a few years ago, literally 3 years ago, battery was a blip. You saw nothing, you know, in that area. And
I was told both by the president of ERCOT and by the president of CalISO that they got through last year largely because of the increased battery availability. And that simply wasn't a factor even 3 years ago. So that's very interesting, Dan. What is your wish list? If you had a wish list, what would you add? Would you add more solar, more wind, and to what extent are you catering for the growth in data centers? Most of the utilities I talk to in Texas have data centers trying to get into their system or want to be served in the future by systems that are now unable to accommodate them and will have to expand their generation to accommodate them. What's your position?
Yeah, well, my ultimate wish list, and unfortunately, it's optimistically it be within the next 10 years is small modular reactors. I would really love to see that technology mature get to commercialization, and we're just seeing that. And there's certainly activity in that area, but it does look like optimistically it'll be the early 2030s that we maybe would have some more of that in place, and that's a bit on the optimistic side. But that's my ultimate. I think that'd be one of my main wish lists. But I also think that also the diversification of some of the thermal and other storage methods. So I do think long duration energy storage is showing promise. This rust iron battery coming out of Form Energy is a very interesting technology. I do think that would be on my list, and maybe here sooner than later. I think, but the additional types of abilities to solve our energy needs beyond just the traditional electric resources, like looking at compressed air, geothermal would be wonderful. I think that would be another mix. It's probably a bit of holistic, and looking at the hydrogen economy. So I think adding my general approach is a little bit of diversification in it. But I will say, if I were given one thing as a wish list, and we could just will it into existence, it would be small modular reactors.
Terrific, thank you. Those are my questions, but I just add that I've been up and seen Form Energy's factory and its laboratory, and it's very exciting technology. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about iron air in the future. Thank you. Very interesting.
Let me add to another question. Power generation, and this is just a general question that has guided our thinking in the last 10 years. Power generation has sort of outpaced the ability to control. That is, do you see a disjunction between an emphasis on power generation and people still pulling levers by hand? Do you think that as Llewellyn said, as other forms of power come on, the question is how do you control them? And I guess my question is, do we do it by hand like we're doing now? Will AI do it now? Do we have the controls to just turn it loose and let the person babysit it like we do an airplane pilot, or like we do a train pilot? So my basic question is, power generation is great, but the controls haven't changed that much. So
yeah, that's an interesting one. And on that one, John, I appreciate the question. And there's a part of me says, I don't know, but I will say, let me add one thought into it. And I think it's a small piece of it, but back to your AI comment, there's tons of use cases, and that's just rapidly changing. But one of the things that just interestingly, I mean, the SCADA EMS vendor we use for our transmission system, it has now added a feature that's basically an AI operator assistant. So an operator could query it and ask it to tell you something, and it would spit back information. Now, I'll be straight up with you, haven't seen it yet, and I think not unlike what I've heard about Microsoft Copilot, is it's there, but it's still getting, all that stuff's taking time, and it's getting, it takes a little bit for that stuff to mature. But that kind of gets to your point for a moment, that I admit it's hard for me to see things go to just 100% autonomous and all, but I can see AI definitely taking us to a whole different level. We're certainly looking at AI, for example, of how we're going to just process alarms and events in the SCADA EMS system for what the operator can see. So we're doing that now. I mean, when I say we're doing it now, we're in that process of developing that. But that, I think, as we see this stuff rapidly evolving and maturing, I can see in near-term future assistance that really might provide really helpful information to an operator. that is a little bit less of the hand lever pulling, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it does. AI would be just fabulous. We know that, and it's going to be the person that's managing the AI. As I said, just like an airplane pilot now, or maybe an autonomous vehicle now, or whatever it is. So, but I guess I don't know if generation has outpaced the ability to control it, and would that make the grid more efficient if you can control at all times what's needed and what's not wasted, in other words.
Yeah, interesting point. And I like your question, and honestly have to plead more. Like I gave you about the limit of my ability to look at my crystal ball and stuff. So
I got it. Okay, thank you.
So Dan, quick question on workforce. I suspect that the retirements continue. And do you see the next generation stepping up? And is it easier to hire people? And what are you guys doing for training them? And what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's hard to put that one in a monolith, but I do think what's happening is we are seeing some wonderful talent, young talent that's joining our workforce, and it's impressive some of their thoughts and their processes and their ability to think differently and add things to it. I've been very impressed with that. We are seeing that, and this gets a little bit to John's point is that I think we may need some of the assistance we're going to get. I think we're still in this aspect of losing your seasoned planning engineer who has the ability to run dynamic studies and things that we really have to do. And we're going to hopefully see some levels of what AI tools or other things may do to help augment that. But we're still seeing those brain drains that are happening in the system. But we're seeing something else happen that kind of gets into another trend, and it gets back to the large load data center growth. We're seeing the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, they're recruiting utility people because they're putting in their own generation because they're not the time to market with the amount of data centers, whether those are AI or they're enterprise or they're hyperscalers or whatever those data center type loads are. They're not seeing that the grid being able to respond fast enough to do that. So they're out there, everybody's kind of heard a lot of these different stories that's happening where they're building their own generation to go serve that need, and as such, they're hiring utility people. In a sense, they're our new competitor. The interesting thing is it does almost seem like they can print money, we can't and all, and so they have no problem offering significant salaries. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, Andres, to say we're seeing a lot of different things happening, some of it very positively in the workforce, but then we're also seeing other challenges and other market participants that we weren't seeing before. So yeah, that's a quick rundown. I think the training side, I'll say one thing. It's maybe not even. I think there's a whole lot to developing culture as a whole, and this gets very specific to wherever you are. But I think one of the things we always have to do is create a culture that people feel that they see the big picture. We're certainly seeing that with younger graduates these days are coming into the workforce, and they're wanting to contribute in a way that they see as a more holistic benefit to society, to the world, and those things. And so I think establishing culture that facilitates that and provides opportunities is really important. Certainly they want to learn. And so those are things that are really key. And treating people with respect seems basic, but those things are those things are really important, and we're seeing that those are sometimes holding people in our organization, even when they're being, somebody's running a wheelbarrow of money in front of them,
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Let me say this, this kind of technology change in the workplace, we know it's going to change in the future. It just will. And the engineer that used to do X, Y, and Z will babysit X, Y, and Z. So right now, I call myself, when I get on an airplane, I call the pilot a passenger also. Because of the babysitting nature and the greatness and the technology that we have. And I think that if you look at all industries, as new technologies are introduced, there's always a latent fear about job loss. And I think that that's going to be really, really true when AI really hits hold on lots and lots of things. It's going to be really, really, really interesting.
I would, yeah, John, I would echo something that one of the most recent, and I would have to say, I don't know how to quite characterize it. I'd say almost audacious, but applications, and it is there's obviously training these AI models is very intense, but when it's done, if it's done successfully, it really does put some pretty powerful things in place. But I've heard of this one situation where somebody trained a model to do system protection and control of the transmission system of a certain, for example, it might be a transmission line, and I come from that. That's how I joined the utility, was a protection, relay protection and control engineer. I love that. I always tell people when I come back as a second life, that's what I'm going to come back to. I love that stuff. But it sounds like AI may eliminate that opportunity for me, because somebody had trained a model to do it well enough. Now, it took a lot of effort, but that is something that could produce in a few hours what would take a few months for a relay engineer to do. And so that one caught my eye a little bit, and admittedly, I don't think it's quite ready for prime time, but protection engineers who knew what they were doing recognized, no, this is a valid protection scheme. This is something that would work and all.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, well, I grew up doing regression analysis on my knees at Northwestern University on a long piece of pen and paper to a regular system kind of that allowed me to do it. Now I could just talk to AI and say, run a regression, here are the equations, and it's done. What used to take me 4 days to do something now takes 4 seconds. And so I used to work with my PhD students who understand the outcomes but don't know how to do it by hand on their knees, but they don't have to. You just don't have to know how to fly an airplane now. You know how to babysit it.
Can I say something here?
Sure.
Down on this program, we had Sasha Fontaine from SAS, and he was very interested in how AI is affecting some of his client utilities. They're using it for predictive maintenance, for predictive weather, but much slower for systems management. And I was surprised how slow they have been to use it for customer relations. But every day I hear of some slight greater penetration of the electricity space by AI, and I've been reporting on it fairly intensively for a long time now. The trick seems to be developing these agents specific to a particular utility and its needs.
Mm-hmm.
Llewellyn, that's interesting. I still depend upon the dog to predict the storm. I'm from Southern Louisiana. When it comes to prediction, I look at what the animals are doing. When the animals start running to the hills, you know that an earthquake is coming. And we just say,
Johnny, I'm way in front of you. I have arthritis, and I can tell from my joints.
prediction of the weather is very, very interesting, right?
Hey,
We pay no attention to weather. It can be pouring down raining, and we'll say, "Don't worry, the storm will end in 2 seconds."
This is going to become much more important as the administration has cut back on the Federal Weather Service very dramatically. So we're going to be looking to more private services, and we're not going to have as many weather balloons, etc. So we're going to need AI because of what the government is doing to the weather prediction business, which is rather tragic, I think.
So let me take advantage of the fact that we have Dan here. Dan is on the side when he has a few hours to sleep. He's now the chairman of the organizing committee for the IEEE Powering Energy Society annual conference that is coming up in July. Dan, would you like to say a few words about that and make an invitation to everybody?
Yeah, thank you, Andres, and I will a shout out to Andres because he's one of the people on my committee. But I will tell you, he's kind of my consultant. So I actually, Andres, I really appreciate when I went out and made a plea to the IEEE chapter in Austin. Andres was the first to say, "Yeah, I'll help you," and all. So thanks, Andres, for that. But also thanks for the shout out because, yeah, the conference I think is going to be really good. It's usually attended by over 3,500 people from over 60 nations. So it's a very international event, and it's got a good mix of papers and presentations. A lot from academia, but also from the national labs and from industry and from utilities. So it's a great event every year. We're happy to be able to have it here in Austin, Texas. For the Austin people here, it's also the welcome reception will be at the Bob Bullock History Museum Sunday night. So that'll be actually a fun thing too. But I will say too, we've got a really good plenary session. Former FERC chair Pat Wood will be joining us. We'll end up having our general manager of LCRA, Phil Wilson, Leslie Duke with Burns and McDonald, and then we've also have Pablo Vegas with ERCOT. So that'll be a good plenary that we're launching into. But then the content will be about really how we continue to decarbonize the grid and really how to manage that. So a lot of what we talked about today will be talked about in various levels of detail. So really welcome you folks to be there, and as well as anybody from your organizations and connections and everybody else. Andres has helped me a lot in getting the word out. So thanks for that spot, Andres.
Absolutely. And remind us the dates, Dan.
Yeah, July 27th to 31st. And it'll be at the JW Marriott in Austin. So nice venue, a lot to do down there, and so it'll be fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Johnny, any final thoughts?
Well, I just think that, as I said earlier in the very beginning, that we're in a place now where electricity, it determines the gross national product. It determines a lot of stuff. And as people move around America, they're moving to places where maybe there's not enough electricity. I think that that Texas has really sold entrepreneurs and companies to move to Texas. And from a mathematical point of view, the question is, how does that relate to the electricity that we can provide them? So if I move my mega factory or my data science factory from wherever, I just want to plug it in. I'm not interested in looking at any kind of issues. So I think that you're sitting in a great place as director of research. I always think that wealth creation starts with science and technology, and that I teach my students to go to the scientists, right, and be smart about that and let them create all the science. I do like Gates did, just go pick up the science and commercialize it, and Elon, he combined both science and business in a very unique kind of place. So you're in that unique position but I would say pay attention to the science and let the science guide you, because management now has changed. It used to be the whole idea that you have to manage just people. But even as trains came on board, and go back to the great early writers, they were said, you got to manage people and things. And now we have to manage people and the science in a way that we've never done in the past. So I think it's going to be interesting for management and psychology and sociology and economics as we move forward.
Sure, sure. Llewellyn, any final
Well,
thought?
I have a final question, which is, Dan, to what extent are you looking at new conductors? I understand that the new connectors using carbon fiber are more durable, less subject to sag, lighter, and can carry up to twice the power that traditional connectors carry. And I wonder if you're deploying them. I know there's about 145 miles as the crow flies of such connectors in Texas. So it's probably about 3 times that in national power line. Are you looking at connectors as a way of boosting the supply of electricity without building new transmission, just rewiring old transmission?
Yes. To answer your question quickly is to say yes, and actually bring up a really good point that I think is part of the portfolio solution. And I think grid enhancing technologies, of which advanced conductors is one of them, is a very important piece of the puzzle, because we should try to get as much out of the existing infrastructure as we can without having to build new. And it's a really good point. I'm glad you brought it up. It was on my I guess if I would have gotten further down my wish list, it would probably get to the grid enhancing technologies, but we are looking at advanced conductors. We do have some short pieces in the system already, but we're looking at continuing to do that, exactly what you stated, because we do need to get more out of this grid if we're even going to deliver half of what ERCOT thinks we're going to deliver incrementally in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I was gonna say, Dan, that I saw that there is the PUC is holding hearings about the upgrade of the system to 765 kV.
Yeah.
And obviously that's part of that. And then I was gonna ask you a parting question about what are your thoughts on the probability of ERCOT actually driving you all to upgrade to double your output? Can you double your output in 5 years?
I think the answer is no. And now this, I almost feel like I have to say that one is kind of off the record, but I think that most of us who are in this space and knowing what ERCOT had to perform the calculation the way they did, because that's what the legislature directed the Public Utility Commission to do. But the bottom line is the incremental add, we do think what is possible is 50% of it, and that's not chump change. So if you look at it, we're around 87,000 megawatts. They're saying 153,000. So yeah, you do the math here and say, well, let's say we add 30,000 megawatts in the next 5 years. That is not chump change. We have a lot to do to get there. And really, with Llewellyn, your last question, we helped to kind of get to this, along with what you commented on the 765 kV. I don't know what the Vegas odds are on that, but that is seriously being looked at. And very interestingly, this will be I know we're at time, but we as a transmission service provider directed by ERCOT had to basically consider the option of both parallel 345 and 765 really in a sense together, and waiting for this decision as it relates to the Permian Basin. But that's just one piece of it. The whole Permian Basin's part of this, but then there's a larger 765 kV loop that's ERCOT's plan that isn't part of that particular review. So it's I think there's some level of probability that we may see 765 in the ERCOT system. So
wow, that's amazing. That would be amazing.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Dan. We will circle back with you. Looking forward to the conference in July, and we'll have you soon again to have a checkpoint of the progress of the 5 years. So
Sounds good. I enjoyed this. You know, Andres, John, and Llewellyn, it was a real privilege to be on this with you. So thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
It's our pleasure, I assure you, Dan. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. John, take us away.
Okay. Past the sprinkle with so much blues. I got a few old dreams that I can't use. Pulled by my memories of things that used to be. There were the smiles for the tears. And with the smiles of better years, pleased by my memories of things that used to be.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Johnny. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Okay, Dan.
Yep.
Take care.
Dan.
Good stuff. All righty.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.